Welcome everyone to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and today I'm very excited to bring to you an introduction to the Family Checker tool. This is a tool that we are reintroducing because we've done a fairly massive rebuild on this tool overall. And we want to show you all what it looks like and how it works and how it can help you. Now, as always, of course, these webinars are recorded, so you can always come back to and watch this later from our YouTube channel, and we encourage you to subscribe there so you can be notified whenever we post new recorded webinar content. Also, as always, for those of you who are joining us live, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation, and I try to answer those in line, but we also save a QA session for the end. So if you've got questions about this tool, feel free to throw them in the questions window within the GoToWebinar here. But without further ado, let's jump in and talk about today's topic. So, having the ability to kind of check your content, your Revit families, to really make sure that everything works as you want it to, things like scheduling, things like your parameters, all that stuff, that's really important. The trick is most of us don't have an automated way to do that. Most of us are still manually checking families or manually chasing down issues as they creep up, and that's not really very efficient. It's not very ideal. So today we're going to be discussing the tool that helps you streamline this quality check process and help you understand how it can really inform about where you may need to take some action. And again, this is a reintroduction to the Family Checker tool. This is on the BIM Manager Suite because it recently underwent some massive changes. So this is the introduction that you're looking for effectively. We're going to cover a couple of major topics. I want to show you what the new user interface looks like. We are going to talk about tailoring some of the settings so that they work specifically for your organization. We are going to discuss how to run a quality check, a standards check in batch, though I'm not going to actually run it. I have one running right now in the background. It's been running for a little while here on about 135 families, and I'm hoping that it'll be done by the time we're ready to take a look at it. But we also are going to then review the reported data inside of Microsoft's Power BI as a free tool or a free enough tool for us to be able to leverage this. So that's the intent there. And we're going to take a look at what those actual values mean and how you can interpret some of that, and even how you can customize it so that it actually gives you information that's meaningful to you. Okay, I'm going to jump in here first and start taking a look at the Family Checker user interface. So within Revit over here, I have Revit opened up. And I'm going to jump to the CTC Management tab here because that's where we are going to be finding the CTC BIM Manager Suite. And the tool on this suite that I'm looking for is this licensed tool here, Family Checker. This tool is not one of the free tools. You can identify it differently because the free tools are light colored. The licensed paid for tools are the darker colored icons, and this is certainly a licensed paid tool. So this is the Family Checker here. It's how we're going to fire it up. I'm going to be throwing this back up on the ribbon and just opening up the Family Checker tool itself. And of course, it opens up on a separate monitor because why wouldn't it do that, right? So with this tool open, there's two kinds of things you can run here. In the family selection, you can either run a check on the current family file that you have open in your active Revit session, and I would normally recommend that you run this with a family open, though this can technically be run with a project open. It doesn't really matter. It can be run with nothing open if you really want it to, as long as Revit itself is open on the splash page, you can run this. But generally, I tend to be in a family when I'm thinking about running this particular tool. Or if you wanted, you could run this against multiple family files. This is that batch check. I would usually use the single family file when I want to verify that my settings are giving me back results and that I've got it tuned correctly for my standards. But then after I've done that, I would run it against multiple families across my network and whatever. So you can browse for a specific primary folder of content. In my case, for example, if I wanted to browse to, let's just use the out-of-the-box content here. If I was to go to Autodesk, Revit, is it Revit? No, it's a specific version, I believe, Revit 2020, since that's the version of Revit that I happen to be in. and I can go to libraries, and maybe I wanted to check the U.S. Imperial Library to see just how quality that content is. So I could pick that, and it would look in the top main folder here, or I can check the search in subfolder option, and it's going to rip through all of those subfolders of content and find me pretty much everything out here that's inside of there. Tons of annotations and whatnot. Now, these are not families that it's actually going to check. These are families that it's queued to allow me to choose to check. So if I wanted to scroll down here and say I wanted to check architectural windows content, I can select a number of files here and add those selected files to my actual checking queue. In this case, there's 12 files now in my selected queue. And if I was to click check families, it would run those, all right? So to the right over here is the report that it will generate at the very end, whether that be for a single family or whether that be for a batch of families. Now, within here, something that we also need to check out is the options. And that's what we're going to take a look at next. It's the settings overview, because we need to make sure this is configured correctly for our company standards. So here in the options, there's a few things that you can modify. First of all, just a user information here. This will just prefix file names and put some data into the resulting report file as to who ran the check. I like to put my initials. You can click auto over here. This pulls it off of your current computer username if that's how your computer usernames are set up, but otherwise I tend to just type it in. You also need to make sure you specify your corporate shared parameter file. In my case, I've specified the MEP Productivity Packs shared parameters, the really good quality parameter set that I use for pretty much everything. And then I add to it whatever I need to for disciplines outside the MEP Productivity Pack personally. But I mean, whatever your standardized shared parameter file is that you're using, pick that, because that's what your families should be matching. Now, there's other tabs inside of here that are also very important here. If I click here to the Valid Groups tab, this lets me take the individual parameter types, or parameter data types rather, that exist within Revit, and allows me to associate these data types to groups within Revit. So these are the groups that exist over here, right? There's constraints, there's dimensions, there's identity data. And every once in a while, I see people do some squirrely things, like they'll take dimensions and put them into text. Well, it's not that big of a deal, really, but there's certain groupings that make some kind of logical sense. I like having my dimensional data in a specific set of groups so that it's easier for end users to go find them. So I have pre-set up over here some groupings that I consider good to go. Every single group that is available within Revit is listed here. So even those that I'm not seeing here, of course, right now, because this family doesn't have all of the groupings available to it, but this is every single possible grouping that could exist within the properties or type dialog box. And so what you can do is say, well, you know, I have inside of here just some common properties like length, right? Length can appear in a number of these. And there are some that are probably better than others. Like, I don't want length appearing in text. That would be a little silly. So I actually have it in here right now. That's odd. I didn't really want that. So I could simply remove that from the list, just delete that length option from this and then resave my settings. And then what would happen is, if any length parameter types were discovered in a text group, it would affect the score, the final score of parameter groupings within my family. This is actually one of the categories is groupings. So this would help me be able to just quickly discover, are my groupings a little squirrely? Now, it's not going to say parameter name XYZ shows up in this particular group. It's not getting to that level. It's just saying, do the data types match the groups that they're supposed to be in, based on what I think is appropriate for my company and how I want my families organized, yes or no. And then if they're not, then I can go take action on that. Similarly, I have some name rules set up here. There's certain parts of names that I just don't want to see in a parameter name. I don't want feet and inches or apostrophes and quotation marks within parameter names. I don't like most of the mathematical characters showing up in parameter names. It makes formulas a bit more convoluted, and it's just dirty. It's kind of messy here. I don't like greater than, less than, things like that in parameter names. There's certain things that perhaps I do want to see over there, like maybe it's okay if a hyphen shows up in a parameter name, and so I'm going to consider that valid, even though it's a mathematical character. I can explicitly call out if there's a hyphen, that's okay, and it's not going to score it poorly. But if any of these are found, it's going to score it poorly. Any of these are found, it's just going to say, yep, nope, that's expected. These types of abbreviations like CTRL or HID for hidden parameters, or the @ sign, for example, maybe those are all okay characters. And maybe I want them to appear, or want to allow them to appear. And so then this will be used when it's looking at parameter names, both my shared parameters and my custom family parameters. It will look at those and say, do these names look okay? And it will use that in the scoring process. There's also the ability here to leverage subcategories. Now, I haven't added any subcategories that I think are okay. I've got nothing over here. So if any subcategories are discovered in families, it's going to show up. Now, if there were some, like I know that a lot of my families have a clearance subcategory. There's actually two. There's clearance working, and there's clearance install. So, or service. So those two clearances exist as subcategories for very, very few primary Revit categories. And I could add those to this list specifically. So maybe I wanted to say for something like generic models. Generic models is a Revit primary category. I could add to the list generic models, and I can edit the parameters that exist inside of here and add to it some custom parameters if I really wanted to. I could like add a subcategory and say clearance, I think that's right, clearance working is a valid subcategory, and so I can have that in my list. Maybe hidden lines I don't care about, so I'm just gonna like pull that out because I don't care about that one explicitly. But generic models clearance working is fully acceptable, right? In my doors, I know that architecturally there's some extra ones that I have here, like swing plan and swing elevation, and they look different and they have different properties. And so within here, I may very well want to add those over here as custom subcategories that are valid. And if any of my content within my family is on those subcategories, then they're going to pass just fine. If I didn't have this here in generic models and there was something that was on clearance, it would score it more poorly as subcategories existing, custom subcategories that are not in my accepted list. This is something that you're going to want to build up one time, and you're going to want to save your options. So if I was to save these options and replace my current MEP settings here, then the next time that I come in here, if for whatever reason my settings were cleared out or I was going to a new computer, I could simply load my settings and be good to go. And then it would restore all of the settings here, my valid groups, my name rules, my everything here, including my subcategories would be restored. The final tab in this list here is the family rule sets, also a part of saved options. And in my case, I have checked absolutely everything inside of here. What this basically does is it does in fact include shared parameter usage in the automated rating checks. It includes custom parameter names, which is some of the custom naming rules here, and custom parameter naming here in that automated rating check. It includes groupings in the rating check. So if you didn't care about these things from a parameters point of view, you could simply uncheck this, and then it would not score the family accordingly. Or you can check it based on this and then exclude it from your final results, which we'll take a look at later. Down here in the file size, you can decide how big of a file size do you want to consider acceptable. Is 4 meg okay? Do you want that to be what you consider to be an okay family loaded into a project? Great. Set 4 meg as your value. Come up here, again, save your settings so that it gets saved out as that value. Just so that in the future, if you want to restore it, you can absolutely do that. But then also there's other things down here, subcategory standards in mappings of the automated rating and the unused subcategories, like are these discovered and they're not being used at all? Do you want to include that in the automated ratings? Do you care about reference plane naming? I personally like having all of my reference planes named so that I know exactly what the use is for those reference planes when I go back in the future. Some companies don't care about that, so you can choose not to include that in the automated ratings. So there's some options here to choose whether you want to include or exclude. Now again, Personally, I always include everything, and then I leverage that later in my reporting, and I just add it to or remove it from my family scores, averages, however I want that added or removed. And I'll show you how to do that a little later on. Okay, so with these settings set, now what I'm going to do is jump back here to the Family Selection tab, Multiple Families, and we're going to talk here real quick about actually running a batch family check. Now, once again, I am not going to actually run the batch family check right now. And I'm not because every single one of these families that I have in the list, on average, takes about a minute to a minute and a half to fully go through the full rule set of checks. And there's a lot that this does actually check. It checks whether there is different detail levels in plan views and 3D views, and whether the geometry is actually visible in all views or not at all detail levels. It checks to see whether the family flexes up and down 10% correctly without any errors. It checks a lot of stuff. There's like about a 40 to 50 point check that it goes through on these families, and then it ultimately enters that into a scored row. So instead of me hitting check families and having it run through, 60 seconds to 90 seconds per family, we're going to skip this step and take a look at reviewing some reports here, because you don't want to just watch a progress bar. And I say that because right now, as I was mentioning before, I have a family check running that I can't even bring onto screen right now. It's been running for about 3 hours. Again, on average, about a minute and a half per family. So you can do the maths on that and figure out about what I'm running, about 130, 150 families here. It's taking it a while. You can see it processing down here in the bottom. And again, for whatever reason, I'm not able to bring the family checker window onto screen because, well, Revit's, oh, there it is. There it is. You can see here, 135 families, and it's on 127 of the 135. I was hoping it was going to be done by our webinar today, but it's not. So it is what it is. But what we're going to do, though, is take a look at some reports and what the ultimate output looks like, and we're going to review this in Power BI. Now, the reason why I want to review this in Power BI specifically is because these reports come out as a .csv file here, which technically you could open up in Excel, but in its raw format here, if I was to say open this with Notepad, right? These aren't very friendly files to read. What this is listing out is every file that's being checked, the path that it was discovered at, what the Revit category and category name happens to be for these, what Revit version, the date and timestamp, and then over to the right here, it's going through a whole series of scores of how this family kind of ranks based on, and what the file size is based on all those different checks, right? So there's a lot to it, but I don't really want to look at this in this format. This is not very usable. But something that can really easily review this is Microsoft Power BI. And so I've prepared a file here. And by the way, if you want this sample file, I'll give you my default sample sort of template. Just write us. And we'll be more than happy to send that off to you so you can review these reports in a fairly easy way starting with at least the template that I've got here. In this case, I'm going to open up this webinar file right here. And we're going to start by taking a look at what was in that report that I ran last time. This is a while ago now. This is last year sometime that I ran this. But let's just kind of take a look at this. There's 3 major tabs that I've put into here. There's the family standards, and I currently still have the word Hive in here because I was also using this for my Hive family standards check. I'm going to pull that out because that's not relevant here. It's just family standards review here. I've got a family standards general report where I've included some fields that I just consider general standards checking. And then I've got an organization specific standards check here that actually have things like shared parameters and groupings that are kind of customized by you. So those are the 3 tabs that I have in this report. And then because I've got a specific theme going here, I've got a template going as well, so that you can kind of create additionals on this if you really want to. But this first tab, for me at least, tends to be the most interesting. When I was going through this library of content, there's about 480 specific model-based families that I ran through the check. The average rating of all of it across the board is about 2.86 out of a possible 5. So It's not great. It's not what I wanted, but this is back in 2019 content, and I used this as a way to figure out where I wanted to improve certain aspects of a family library that we put together. I'm also able to see here what the lowest 10 in this case rated families are and what their scores are, so I could sort of isolate these and do some work on them. And then to the right here in this 20 categories of content, I've also broken it apart into what we call a sunburst chart, so I could isolate things like mechanical equipment or duct fittings or pipe fittings. And on the outside of the sunburst chart is telling me the different types of sort of parts that these families are. In the world of MEP, part types are pretty important. So I can tell if something is a transformer, a switchboard, or a panel board, or like, what is this item? Is it a wire, a union, or whatever it is? So I can see the normal equipment versus equipment that breaks into something. But if I wanted to isolate this, because this is Microsoft Power BI and how it works, it gives me a really quick refresh, and it says, well, there's 101 specific mechanical equipment items in this list. There's one category in this case. The average rating of it is 2.85 for that particular category. My duct fittings have an actual average rating here of 3, which isn't terrible. That's okay. I'd like it to be better, but at least it's not terrible, right? Pipe fittings, average rating 3.3 as well. Pipe accessories, a little bit lower, almost 3. But I can start to isolate by category and see like what categories need a little bit more love than others. My electrical fixtures, 2.5 kind of. It's not that great. But I can again see down here the bottom 10 families per that category and see like maybe where I want to focus the vast majority of my efforts on doing some repairs. So that's kind of nice. I have the ability to really filter this down, focus on specific part types here, like all those that are break into parts, right? I can see all of their individual overall ratings. And you get to tune what this overall rating means, what this is based on. I'm going to show you how to customize that here in a minute. Now, if I wanted to see about how these families scored out, this is sort of just spreadsheet-like presentation of data here. But the nice thing about this is I can really quickly just sort this. Maybe I care a lot about identity data information. Maybe I don't. Maybe I care a lot about detail level. Maybe I don't. So with these, I get to kind of like, yeah, I actually do care that items show up in plan, and I want to see the ones that are the absolute worst at this particular issue where there's, for whatever reason, no plan graphics. So I can see if there's something meaningful that I have to do there. So I can sort by this, and I can start to take a look through all of these ones. Like there's some busway items here that for whatever reason don't have any proper plan visibility associated to them, and that could be a problem. There's some caps and some channels and items like that that for whatever reason don't have any proper plan visibility graphics. There's either no 3D or 2D elements that are showing up in a plan view orientation, and that could be an issue. And so I can go through and start to understand more about that and figure out what's going on in my families that's causing this rating to be so poor. In general, about visibility graphics, again, I can isolate this and go, well, there's 3 items here that are having just general visibility issues where they're not able to be seen properly in all of the different orientations, especially 3D views. So I could maybe go take a look at that and figure out what's going on there. Is there anything in my libraries that have any imported content? Nope, looks like everything scores out as 5s. Now that to me is a big deal. I care about that. If there's any imported like CAD file stuff inside of there, I want to know about that. That helps me out. Is there anything that's erroring when it flexes? So in the geometry flex here, there's some of these that don't have any flexible parameters. That's why they have no score, but there's some items down here that when they flex, when the values that are dimensional actually change, they were throwing errors for whatever reason. Whether it was up and down 10%, it was giving a problem. And I want to know about that. I need to know about that so I can fix those families. Because if they break in general family flexing, they're probably going to break when they're in a project. And we use this to go through and actually fix all of this content. So this is a way where I can actually go through and figure out what's going on. Do the types flex, the geometry flex? If it has MEP connectors, are they hooked up correctly? First of all, should it have MEP connectors? Some of these families here, if I scroll back to the left, in this case, it's going to be a little tricky here, but some of these items here, they are of an MEP category, and they should have MEP connectors in them. But for whatever reason, they don't have any MEP connectors in them, and maybe I want to investigate that because that's kind of important. Now, if they do have MEP connectors, well, then their descriptions and other properties should be set up as well. So do they have proper descriptions? Do they have proper mappings for the data values on those connectors? Are they facing the correct way? Are they facing into solid geometry and they shouldn't be? Are they linked correctly? And this is one that's sort of subjective, so a lot of people tend to not include this one. Does my content have proper materials, right? Like, these are just general things that I want to just know about my content. If it has materials, does it have proper structural or thermal properties associated to it, physical properties associated to it? Is it using type catalogs or omni-class values or assembly codes, right? Just basic things that within my families, if they matter to me, I want to go check that. And this tells me pass, fail, or within a range, like how good or bad is it? And so I can start to leverage this to really figure out what's going on. Now, there's also some of these things that are very specific to my organization. Are these using my shared parameter file correctly? If there's any of these that are ones, that means that it has a bunch of shared parameters in it. They look like they're mine, but they're not mine, and that's a big deal. Some of these have most of their shared parameters mapped, but not all of them. But the vast majority, I think, or I hope, of my families are actually doing pretty good. Let's find out if I got any 5s inside. Most of these are 3s. And what that means is that there are shared parameters in there that could or should be in my shared parameter file, but they're not. And so I should really go through and figure that out. Now, there's also some times when there's custom parameters. And those custom parameters are just family parameters that exist inside of there. Sometimes those family parameter names are actually parameters that are in my shared parameter file, and that's probably why some of these are getting 3s over here. Some of these are just good parameters, but they've got poor naming conventions. That's probably where these 1s are coming from here, where they're actually using naming parts that are in my band name parts list. Some of my master shared parameters might have sort of the same thing, where I've got it in my parameters file, and it's using those characters that I considered not good. Some of these are grouped poorly, where there's parameters in groups where they shouldn't be. I should probably go fix that so that they are organized better, more usable for the end users. Some of these have ridiculously large or had ridiculously large file sizes, so they're all scoring poorly because of that. Most of the families here are over a meg, and you saw when I opened the settings window, 1 meg was my limit. I probably should have had that a bit higher, knowing that this is MEP content, but in this case, they're all going to score very poorly. Subcategories. Are they using subcategories? This is an example where some of these families are using no subcategories. Some of them are probably using those clearances, and that's why they're 1s, because they're using subcategories that are not in my approved list, since there was nothing in my approved list when I ran the check, right? So there's a lot of this through here where you can go through and just start to inspect and see, do these families match or comply generally with my standards or not? And then based on that, I can see what the overall rating is. Now, also inside of this report, you can see what specifically the org level rating is. This family scores really low on my org standard set, but probably scores a little bit better on the general standards check. The general standards, like generally it flexes. It's okay there, right? Generally, it's going through and it has good visibility graphics. It has all those other things, but the parameters just don't match up, which means it's not going to schedule well for me. So I like to know, is my org standard above or below the family's average? And so I can kind of see that real quick here. I've chosen to include that. This is specifically in this case for a backflow preventer, right? If I wanted to go find that specific family over here, I could just sort by the file name, go find the backflow preventer, the same exact thing, and see, like, yeah, okay, the general rating is acceptable, but the overall rating is brought down because the organization standards were so low for it. Well, again, there's times when maybe there's items in this list that I just don't care about. Like, I don't care about the identity data being mapped well, or I don't care about if there's a type catalog or not. Like, that doesn't matter to me. So over here, type catalog usage, maybe I want to pull this out of the scoring factor. Maybe I don't care about materials. I could pull these items out of my scoring factor. But how? How do we do that? Well, let me show you a little bit about how reports in Power BI can be really fairly quickly customized. Now, I'm going to show you some of the back workings here of Power BI. Don't freak out. It's pretty easy, actually. I've already pre-tuned this, and all you have to do is just minorly customize it. Here in Power BI, there's this transform data option here at the top. If you edit this, it's going to bring up the core data import window, and it looks a lot like spreadsheets. Over here to the right, there's some average rating general settings and some average rating org settings. If you hit a little gear symbol over here, what this is going to do is bring up the maths for this. This is a lot like an Excel formula where it's doing a rounding to a single decimal place of the average of an entire list of sets of properties inside of here. So this list looks a little bit convoluted here, but really all this is field names here. So these little columns at the top, those values that we were looking at, like detail level right here, or detail level in 3D, if there's any of these that you don't care about, pull them out of the list. If you're like, hey, Sean, I just don't care about type catalogs, great. We're going to take type catalog usage and delete it from the list. And if there's a comma before it, just delete that comma before it as well. And get the open square and closing square brackets. Just delete that from the list. Pull it out, right? Sean, I don't care about material properties. Great. Let's just take all these material properties right here and get them pulled out of the list as well. There's material application, because I don't care. There's thermal properties, structural properties, physical properties. I personally don't care about these in my families. It's not relevant to me. I'm going to pull them out of the overall average score. This will be an instantaneous score difference as we go through this little exercise here. Anything else inside of here that maybe I don't care about? Host flex, yeah, that's good. Oh, I was mentioning about the connector linking, right? This is something that a lot of MEP companies, this used to be really important in MEP families, and maybe it's no longer quite as important, so I can pull that out of the scoring list because for me, maybe I don't care. Or if you're architecture and you could care less about anything MEP, pull it all out of the list, right? That's fine. You may only care about these first few items here. Maybe you don't care about the assembly codes and omni-class numbering values. Maybe that's not meaningful to you. Again, you just simply delete those from the list. And then ultimately, when you click OK, it's going to rerun that average rating score over here and give you updated values across the board based on those specific fields. If we go to the average rating for the org, it's the exact same thing. There's a list of things inside of here. And if you're like, you know what, Sean, reference plane naming, I really don't care about reference plane naming. That doesn't matter. I don't really care if my families have a good preview on them by default because maybe you're using a content manager like Hive and it's auto-generating the preview on your behalf. So you can pull that out of the list. Maybe you don't really care as much about the subcategories or if subcategories are unused and you're just like, yeah, you know, that's not that relevant to me. That's fine. You can pull those items out of the list and only care about the things in the families that actually matter to you. Score the things that are relevant to you and then click OK, and that's going to update that average organizational score. Now, some of these, when I pulled some of those items out, they got really poor scores. And that's kind of important for me to know that for the things that I consider relevant, these families are scoring really, really low, and I should really go focus on those, right? I should go take a look at those specific families. Ultimately, when I'm done with this, I can hit apply and close once again, or just once, and it's going to update my general scores out here. It's going to rescan those families and give me new ratings. And now you can see my overall rating here for some of these families, really poor, because I pulled a number of items out that my company doesn't care about that perhaps were elevating the score of some things. And now I can really laser focus on fixing the families with the properties that matter to me, because that's what really counts. Like, you might get a bunch of numbers, but if the number doesn't mean anything to you or you don't really care about it, well, that's kind of important. But in my case, I care that detail level in both 2D and 3D are working well, and most of my families weren't. And so I want to go through and fix those that weren't working well. I like identity data being filled out in my families to know a bit more about manufacturer and model numbers. And if those aren't filled out, well, maybe that's really garbage content. Or maybe you're pulling stuff that's just general and you expect the identity data for things like manufacturers and model numbers to not be a thing. Maybe, again, we go back into transform data and we take from that general report over here, general, we're going to take that identity data out of the list because maybe we don't care. identity data, maybe we pull this out, delete that, and okay that. And now it's going to change my average general scores again because it's going to recalculate and give me a different number over here now based on not caring about the identity data. Now, in this case, it still shows up in this list because I haven't pulled it out, but you could very easily take this table of data in the visualization here and like start pulling out fields you don't want. Like, I don't care about this. I've already pulled it out of my general rating there, so I don't really care about the identity data anymore. Let's get rid of identity data. Let's get rid of some of these other things that maybe I pulled out because I didn't care about. The linking, the materials, in fact, a lot of these things, assembly code, omni class, I didn't care about, type catalog usage, I didn't care about. There's quite a few of these here. So if I pull them out of the list, well, this just becomes a little bit easier to navigate now because I've got a shorter list of things that I actually care about. You do this thing once. Set this up for yourself one time in this Power BI file, and then the next time when you run a family check and you want to check it, you simply open it up, you tell it to refresh with that newest file, and you're off and running. By the way, how do you refresh for that file? How does this know to look at that particular Excel file? Well, if you go into transform data at the top, there's parameters that exist in this file. I've pre-baked in what that file path is for me, in my case. But you could just simply take this file path and go in Windows Explorer and browse it to a different file path. Did my family checker finish? No, it's still running there. So I don't have the ability to go get a different file path here. But if I was to go, say, take this file, you can shift right-click on any file in Windows. And when you do shift right-click, you can copy that as a path. Copy the whole path of whatever this is. When you do that and you jump into Microsoft Power BI, you can simply take this entire path here and paste in the path you copied. But you do need to remove this quotation mark at the end, and there's also one at the beginning. Just remove those quotation marks and just have the stock path right out of Windows pasted right into here. So when I click OK, this now I can click refresh, and it's going to rescan all of my data, re-pull the data back in here. And because I have now customized how I like to do my general scoring and my organizational specific scoring over here, in fact, I should probably sort this based on the lowest on top, right? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of ones in this list. There's a whole bunch of really bad stuff that doesn't match my shared parameters at all. It's got a bunch of custom parameters. The naming is wrong. It's poor file size. Everything about this thing is bad, right? I want to focus on that content and get all this stuff fixed up so that it's all fives. I want this to be better instead of being such poor content. And once again, there are certain things in this list that are still showing up here because I never removed them from this list, but I think it was reference planes and previews that I didn't care about. Everything else about this, maybe I think I pulled out subcategories. I don't recall if I did or not. But whatever you've pulled out, pull those out of the list. You're actually seeing the values that you care about, and you're seeing the rating based on those values. Focus on those. Spend your time, invest your time fixing this content up. It's helping you laser focus your efforts. That's the whole point of this. Okay, I think I've beat that enough. I'm going to resave my little webinar file here. Again, if you want my default template, simply reach out to us. We're more than happy to send that to you. You can hit us up at info@CTC Software and just request that particular file. So with that, I'm going to start by saying thank you for those of you who are not going to hang out for any kind of questions and answers. Thank you. We always appreciate when you show up to our live webinars. Thank you for those of you who have watched to the end of the YouTube video. The algorithm loves that. We hope that you found this meaningful, and we hope to see you in future CTC webinars.